Oh, sorry.
And we're live. It is Wednesday, February 26th. Sorry about that. The year of our Lord 2005. The cactus is back. It is 8 o'clock a.m. Our guest is wearing a button down dog shirt, which makes him a legend and a hero in the history of guests in on this show. Very few of whom have ever shown up in a dog shirt at all, most of whom have never previously heard of the show and are therefore bewildered by the name, bewildered by the fact of the dog shirt. They haven't done their background research. They haven't prepared truly for the event. Some of them, once in a while, have shown up in a dog shirt, but never has anyone shown up in a printed, floral pattern, absurd dog shirt before, with, like that out crazy is my dog shirt today, which is relatively simple and restrained. Look, the sun is shining, the birds are chirping. Dan Bongino is the deputy director of the Federal Bureau of Investigations. And Cactus,
You're watching Dog Shirt TV, an acting revolution in morning television.
you are watching Shirt TV, and it is an effing revolution in morning television. And one of the revolutionary features of it is that every now and then a guest shows up wearing a floral patterned dog shirt, and is still not as ridiculous as the news. Holly, Berkley, Fletcher, why don't you introduce our guest who is already a legend on Dog Shirt TV, but is in fact legendary for other reasons?
Yes, Rick Ehrenreich is legendary in the intelligence community as a longtime Central Africa analyst at the State Department's Bureau of Intelligence. What is the I'm looking on
Oh,
intelligence
it's
and research?
Intelligence Research,
Oh,
INR, like Toys R Us.
I thought it was, but then I had a moment of like, is the N like N? That's really
Yep.
fun. Okay, anyway, Rick is recently retired, so he is, like myself, free to speak to the people. And yeah, legendary on Central Africa. So,
And let's actually focus on the institution for a moment before we focus on Rick, because this is an institution that very few people outside of the federal government even know exists, and yet inside the federal government has a kind of cool cachet. So, Holly, tell us about about INR.
so INR is the State Department's very small but mighty intelligence wing, and yeah, in the IC, every IC agency kind of has its personality, and I would say INR, at least from CIA lens, Rick, INR is like the wizened, more academic style analyst. They read more books than we do, and they are very learned. And
Famous for getting a few really big things right,
yes,
right?
I believe they were correct on Iraq, WMD. I'm sure I, I know they've gotten things wrong, however, as well.
Yeah,
Nobody's
but we're not
perfect.
we're not going to pump up our guest by talking about the things that their institution gets wrong. Holly, that's,
Well,
Pete
I just mentioned
Nwaka's
it
I'll take
because,
job.
full credit for all the good stuff and deny all the bad
Yeah,
yeah,
stuff.
exactly.
I just mention it because, we love in the IC, we love our other agencies, but it's a healthy rivalry.
All right, let me put it this way. INR is one of the small agencies in the, when you list like the 17 intelligence agencies that did blah blah blah, or that said blah blah blah. INR is one of the agencies that is very small, but whose presence on lists matters because it is an analytic shop whose opinion is taken seriously about things. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think so. I think so.
And
All
I
right. So why did you step down, Rick? It
I'm
seemed like
old.
it
I'm
just
tired
we
of this
were about
crap.
to make America great again, and you decided you didn't want to work for Secretary of State Pete Maraca?
No, actually, I made the decision and jumped ship on Halloween. So that was a few days before the election. I had no idea what was going to happen, but I didn't really have that much more to say, and I
au
figured
contraire.
au contraire. Well, actually, whatever. Um, yeah, I was just ready to go.
And what are you doing now? Are you just sipping margaritas by the beach?
No, 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 not at all. Manhattans.
Well played.
Yeah, I had to drag him on this show, by the way, but the reason
Because he
I
was
want
hungover and, there were
Exactly.
too many Manhattans and yeah, so um
I had to drag him on the show, but I wanted him to come on because it's been a very momentous several months in DRC, in the Eastern DRC, where there's quite a war going on. Rwanda has basically, well, they've long meddled in Eastern DRC, but it's been more brazen, and the militia they back has taken over quite a
what
bit
is
of
the
territory.
DRC for people who are listening to this thinking that there's some federal government agency that the Doge has just dismantled called DRC. What is the DRC?
The Democratic Republic of the Congo, and it's
Okay,
the
so it's
Rwandans that are
not
working on
it's
dismantling it.
not a U.S. government agency. It's not
Not
Decidedly
yet.
not.
and it's not and the Doge can't actually do more damage to it than it's
Although I
already doing to itself and with help from Paul
Well,
Kagame.
yeah, I think one of the things, if you cut USAID, you cut a large part of our policy to the Congo, and aid has been a central part of doing everything from fighting diseases to, like Ebola, for instance, and to basically helping develop the place.
So we actually can do some damage and are doing it.
Already
Uh,
have been.
yeah. Okay.
However, I wanted to start today with an interesting bit of news because it also dovetails with an interesting bit of Ukraine Russian news, and that is, I saw yesterday that the DRC has offered the Trump administration mining, and Europe, America and Europe, mining. They can come in and basically just take stuff, I guess, I don't know, in exchange for telling Rwanda to F off.
Yeah.
And that's interesting because for many reasons, but also the news yesterday that Ukraine had also apparently agreed to a similar type of thing. And I wonder if, on both counts, and I'm interested in both of your opinions, if it's kind of, they obviously are appealing to the transactional nature of Donald
Not
Trump.
transactional. Transactional, that's too generous. The extractive East India Tea Company imperialist.
But I also wonder if they are banking on his complete ignorance of how the US has, and maybe it could change, done, like the government doesn't run it. We don't have a government mining state owned
Well, they
enterprise.
took that
Not
sign
yet.
down from USAID. They could put up a new one that's,
It could be coming.
extraction is us kind
But
of
I wonder
thing.
if they're banking on, like, okay, this is basically just an invite for U.S. companies who may or may not come because of the certainly Congo. They've already long pulled out because it's a difficult place to operate. If they're sort of counting on baiting him and knowing that this is actually not a thing, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think that they do want to get us in or get the Europeans in, and they want to basically have good, strong friends that can stand up to the Rwandans. And they do this. They've done this before. Back in the day when Mobutu was toppled and his Laurent Kabila, his replacement, came in, the first thing he did is he started reaching out to foreign mining interests. And they went in cautiously, and Laurent Kabila was a very erratic leader, to say the least. And but after about 2003, a lot of solid deals were signed, and the mining industry has basically gone, from like in 1987, there was about 500,000 metric tons of copper mined, and a similar or a proportionate amount of cobalt. By 1994, the whole industry had collapsed, so there was about 20,000. And then after 2003, it's gone up again steadily with all these Western and Chinese mining contracts. And last year, they mined about 2 million tons. So from like 20,000 tons to 2 million tons, that's pretty impressive.
But the point is, it's not like Belgian style where a government sort of entity is coming in and just like stealing things, and it's a private
Yeah,
invest.
it's individual companies. Like the Chinese companies are, genuine Chinese companies as opposed to the Chinese state, although their relations are often very close. Um,
All
s-
right, so
it-
give us back up a little bit and give
yeah,
us the history in a nutshell. And the history is obviously long, tortured, and complicated, but of what Rwanda is doing in there and
sure.
why this country that obviously goes back to Mobutu and before, how it came to be such a wreck as it is now, and what uh, why Paul Kagame is feeding off of its carcass the way he is.
Well, it's interesting because you could not imagine two more opposite countries than DRC, Congo, and Rwanda. DRC was the borders were established by Europeans sitting around a conference table in Berlin in the 1880s, and it's basically where the water flows into the Congo River or elsewhere. So this border was sort of developed, drawing on a map in Europe, in Germany. You have one country that is very small, about the size of Maryland. You have another country that's very big, about the size of the U.S. east of the Mississippi River. I think it's like Rwanda is 1/86th the size of the DRC. You have, in contrast to a country that was sort of formed with like 200 ethnic groups and a similar number of languages and dialects, you have a country that basically has been unified for since about the 1400s. The people argue exactly when the Rwandan kingdom came into being, but that's ballpark when it was.
It's
And
that very rare thing in the African continent, which is an actual nation state that is
exactly.
roughly what the ethnography and borders would have, geographical features would have naturally created on its own.
Very, very much the case. When they were sitting around that conference table in Berlin, Rwanda and Burundi were sort of part of German East Africa because that was where the water was flowing toward the Indian Ocean. So the Germans sort of send these little caravans across East Africa, their new possession, to sort of check this place out, and they have all these people that are sort of like, bowing down to them and giving them great respect, and then they sort of come to the border of Rwanda, and to a degree Burundi, and they have these guys that are sitting there and just. Yeah, who are these clowns? And they're just like completely self-assured. They do not give a crap about these weird people in funny helmets walking around. And the Germans quickly realized, oh, these guys are different. And the Rwandans had a very feudal, and the Burundians too, had a very feudal society, feudal societies. And Europeans get feudalism. And so there's like, these guys are a little bit different than these other guys. So rather than being part of Germany, East Africa, they sort of governed it separately as protectorates, or a single protectorate of Rwanda, Urundi. And so it maintained its cohesion. What's kind of interesting about the colonial period, first with the Germans and to a degree with the Belgians, is the royalty in the Rwandan royalty in particular did a really good job of manipulating the colonialists. You know, there's been a couple of books about it, and they just sort of ran circles around the Germans, and to a
Just like
degree,
they're still doing with us now.
exactly, they are really good. And that's one of the things, you know, when you've been around all these hundreds of years, and it's like court politics. It's like these guys can give Machiavelli lessons, and they just sort of internalize these maneuverings and lying in a way that, you know, kind of makes modern Westerners a little bit squeamish. But they're really good at it. They're really good diplomats. You know, it's like that Neil Young song, "The women and all were beautiful, the men stood straight and strong," and you know, we just loved them, especially because they sort of came to power. This particular group, um, after independence in 1962, it was ruled for 30 years by ethnic Hutu, which were also Rwandans, but from sort of a larger caste, about 85% of the population. But the Tutsis came back to rule the place under Paul Kagame in 1994 after the genocide. The genocide horrified the West, including the Americans, including the Clinton administration. And then they saw the new guys, and they were really impressed. And you know,
And Kagame talks a really good game.
that's a great game,
He's a
and
he
he's produced in
presents
some ways.
as a Western oriented uh, lead post genocide leader who's all about, you know, constructing a modern state.
He's like a hero still to many, many people.
Absolutely.
The sort of murderous authoritarian nature of his regime doesn't seem to break through. Like, people talk about him like he's, you know, Volodymyr Zelensky or something, rather than, you know, a sort of you know, post genocide murderous,
Well,
you
he
know,
does.
authoritarian.
The thing is when he came to power, he was surrounded by it was a group of people. It was this Rwandese Patriotic Front, and they were a very impressive group, and there were different personalities, different elements to them. But they were all again, you know, beautiful women and strong men. Everybody's handsome, and they speak English, and they charmed us. And I was actually talking to a couple of them at different times. These old guys, or you know, back in the day, and I was saying, you know, it's almost as you guys spend all night sitting around at midnight, sort of working out your plans, your communication strategy for what you're going to be telling the West. And it goes, oh, of course, yeah, we do that every night. And I was like, oh, really? Oh, yeah. I
The
mean,
Democrats could take a page. You
they
know,
could.
maybe they should go to maybe Kagame should do a school of propaganda, and the Democrats could attend, and that might help.
But it's changed a little bit. I mean, because like in the 90s and in the early 2000s, there was this group of people, this group of Rwandese Patriotic Front people, and they literally, they literally did sort of work things out, discuss things to the end of time, but then came up with it was a democratic centralism thing. You know, they sort of come up with a common policy, everybody signs on to it, and that's where we are. And generally the policies are really good, and generally, well, the communications policies, the communication strategies were very effective. and the development policies too, in a lot of ways. But they were one of the things that happened roughly 1998, 2001, 2, 3, is Kagame took over. I mean, what had become, what was sort of a one-party state with probably 30, 40 people at sort of the upper echelon that were sort of making most of the decisions.
It's a
Uh,
real Stalin story,
it is, yeah,
right?
very much so. Death of
It
Stalin
goes
is a great
from
movie to
a
explain it.
party collective in which there is a kind democratic centralism is a good word for it, a kind of healthy debate within the clique that then they settle on a policy and enforce pretty brutally to one man purges the rest of the clique, and it becomes
Basically, that's a
a real cult of personality.
That's exactly what happened. And so they've played that game. They've played that game really, really well. And Kagame basically, I, there was a period in like 98, 99 timeframe where you had this sort of in-group and it was very, very opaque because one of the things is everybody kept their mouths shut. Everybody, there was very free discussion within the group, but we on the outside could only surmise, could only guess. And some of us who were doing the surmising and the guessing, these kind of gave them way more of a benefit of a doubt than they deserved. But you began to see these things where certain people were being criticized as being corrupt or being feckless or being dishonest, and you couldn't trust them. And oh, actually, she's really ineffective and doesn't know what she's doing. That guy, he's kind of has a bad human rights record. You really can't trust him. And then you realize that these guys were kind of, on a certain level, some of the Westerners are sort of saying, see how open the regime is. They're able to criticize their own and they're able to sort of make corrections. And then you sort of realize that every time a correction is made, Kagame's getting stronger and stronger. So he sort of he was sort of the strong man of the regime, but his formal title was vice president. He was the defense minister, and he was also the deputy head of the party. But by about 2000, he was like the president. He was the head of the party. He was the president, and
It's
he's
kind of the
been.
way I took power at lawfare. First I was just deputy editor, but then other people just started. There were these news stories about them about how they were corrupt, and they would sort of end up
Lots of
dead at some point. And before I knew it, I was just the dear leader. How did they end up in DRC?
Well,
Because
it's
it's one thing
interesting.
to be a local, you know, to seize power within a small state the size of Maryland when you've had a genocide and you've kind of charmed the West. But it's quite another thing to destabilize and really take down a giant country that um like that's a bold move.
Yeah. Well, I mean, again, talking about opposites, Congo is giant but weak and disorganized, hopelessly disorganized. Rwanda is small but very strong militarily, politically, and they've got a leadership they have a leader, a single leader, but formerly a leadership that kind of knew what they were all about. There's a certain mentality there that the Congolese just don't have as far as a unified mentality. To a degree, they've gotten it over the decades, and part of it was former President Mobutu, who ruled for like 30 years. One of the things
He
he
was
did,
the guy with
Lion.
the
U.S.
goat head and the
the same,
staff and the rumble in the jungle stuff. If you ever want to
exactly.
see a great movie about Mobutu, there is a wonderful documentary about the Ali Foreman or fight in uh, Kinshasa called When We Were Kings, in which Mobutu makes I would say more than a cameo.
No,
It's a
exactly.
terrific movie, and
And
it gives you a flavor for his regime.
And
And
to this,
important to mention that he was a U.S. client in the context of the Cold War. So
very
we
much so.
we bear a lot of responsibility for Mobutu. And he's a classic dictator. He has the outfit. He has the like 14-word nickname that's ridiculous. It's like the rooster who prowls in the night
And
and
if
wins
you
all the
and
hits.
if you want to see like where the QAnon shaman got his outfit from,
Yeah,
check
good
out,
point.
No, he's classic.
Mobutu.
You
But
can't do dictator better than Mobutu. Maybe Trump will get him a leopard skin hat. I think he would look good
oh,
in that.
that's a good idea. Oh, I like that. And doesn't have to. It'll keep his hair in place. But one of the things about Mobutu is you can go to Kinshasa to this day, and you can still find older people who remember the rumble in the jungle. And they'll say, "Oh, that was, we were so cool then." And also Congolese music, and which became a big, it's world music. It's the basis of like current world music in a lot of ways. And
Fashion and arts, Kinshasa being
exactly.
fashion capital. I mean, the whole thing.
Yeah, he'd rent the Concorde and fly in and make a big presentation. So it was like he kind of made, for Congolese, he kind of made Congo cool. And
By the way,
and
he
sort of
was super murderous. So we're not praising him here.
he
He
was
was
only
a
moderately murderous. He was mostly good at paying off people. Actually, he was the classic example of what's his name? Jonathan Rauch was
Yeah,
writing about the
I
other
was
day.
just saying to Matt, I'm amused that Jonathan Rauch is like people are finding, oh, patrimony. This is so amazing. What a huge story. And I'm like, this is how we've been analyzing our
Exactly.
decades.
That's
Now
the world
I'm
Holly and I have been living in all these
Yeah,
years.
this is what we've been, and to me, it's another example of how even the American elite know very little about Africa. No offense.
Very
well.
interesting, this
I just want to say,
patrimonialism
in
which you
defense
speak.
of Jonathan Rauch, who's probably watching at this moment, and Jonathan, if you
Hi,
want to
John.
pop in and defend your late discovery of patrimonialism, I will say that. Uh, um, the history of us ignoring, Americans ignoring intellectual trends in governance until they show up on our shores, and then attributing them uh, rightly or wrongly to Max Weber is a long one and a great one. And so I am for Rausch's observation, whether or not we all collectively should have noticed it going on in Africa for the last, uh, uh, post-colonial.
Well, that's one of the reasons I'm so concerned about the States is because, Holly and I have been looking at this stuff a long time, and it's like, oh, we've seen this movie before, and it doesn't end well in most cases. And anyway, so Mobutu helped give the Congolese a national identity, but one of the other things is Rwanda has helped give the Congolese a national identity. Because one thing that practically every Congolese has in common, and we're talking, whatever your ethnic group, whatever your political affiliation, whatever you think of the current or past Congolese presidents, just about everybody hates Rwanda, and that includes ethnic Tutsi Congolese. A lot of them were very, very. I mean, they flat out rejected vast majority. Flat out rejected this M23 group that's been marauding. Uh, they rejected them 10 or 12 years ago when they had their earlier incarnation. And I sometimes say to people, the Congolese Tutsi are very wary of the Rwandans, partly because Rwanda, the capital of Kigali, is 3 miles away, 3 hours away by car, and the capital in Kinshasa is 3 hours away by plane, by jet. So one is a whole lot more in your face than the other is.
Yeah,
And
we have a way in the United States of thinking about Africa as composed of many small countries. And we, in doing that, actually get, uh, we forget how large the continent is and how big some of those purportedly small countries are.
well, they're small economies, with few exceptions. Small economies with a few medium-sized economies mixed in there. So the GDP of Africa, I don't know precisely what it is, but it's just a few percentage of what, say, I think I think something like Holland has a bigger GDP than South Africa, that sort of thing. But anyway, why does Rwanda do it? I think there's a few reasons. Number one is security. When the RPF, the Rwandese Patriotic Front, and Paul Kagame and his crew first took power after the genocide, they were not the ones that carried out the genocide. They were the ones that defeated the people who perpetrated the genocide. They did a lot of bad stuff on their own, but they came to power, and at least 1.5 million and probably 2 million people fled the country. And that was out of a then population of about 6.5 million. So they fled maybe 500,000 to Tanzania, actually almost exactly 500,000 to Tanzania, a little less than 500,000 to the sort of southwestern border of Rwanda, Congo, into the Congo, and then about a good 1.5 million in the off to northwest Rwanda, where Goma is, in that general area around there. So you had a lot of people who'd been forced out, and a lot of these people were fairly well organized. And I say what you want about the Rwandans, Hutus and Tutsis, they are very well organized folks, and have been for a long time. And these guys organize themselves and were trying to get back in and do hit and run attacks, and the Rwandan government was doing the same thing. So anyway, there's this history of these people on the border. They launched a war in 1996 to clear the borders. They succeeded, the Kigali government, the Rwanda government, succeeded in doing so. And the Zairean, as Congo was then known, the Congolese army just sort of collapsed in front of them. We used to have this term of what they did is loot and scoot. They'd be in a town, and the Rwandans would be the next town over. They would loot the town they're in. They'd flee. The Rwandans and the rebels they supported would sort of like poke around the town, and they would occupy it. The Congolese would then do the same to the next town down the line and kind of suck the Rwandans in. And to a degree, it looks like that's happening these days. And anyway, there was a real security thing. The Rwandans eventually took over the whole Congo, largely with a lot of help from Angola. Don't want to get into too many details, but the Angolan government intervened because Mobutu had been supporting rebels against the Angolan government. So this was Angola's
And
chance.
Angola, which is actually not nearby.
Angola, which is on the other side of the continent. So they basically had a squeeze, and the Angolans basically saw how the Mobutu folks were collapsing in the east, and they said, this is our opportunity. So they actually sent some of their own troops and armor to the east and helped take the Congolese city of Kisangani. Anyway, this is a long story, basically saying that there is a Rwandan security concern these days. They talk about this Rwandan rebel group called the FDLR, the Armed Forces for the Liberation of Rwanda, and it is there might be 1,000, there might be 1,500 people there, there might be less than 1,000. It's not a big group. The original génocidaires, as they call them, those guys, the youngest are probably pushing 50. And it's from that point of view, it's not a threat at all. But it is, two things. One is Kagame, I think, legitimately believes it's a threat because, his Tutsis had been sort of pushed from power, and a lot of them had literally been pushed out of the country for 30 years. And it's only 30 years ago that the genocide happened in Rwanda. So they can sort of see this, they see Kagame, he's a very cautious person. Paranoia is probably not a bad term to describe him. And his caution leads him to see potential enemies anywhere, even if they're not. So anyway, I think he has a real security concern. And it's also it's good politics to sort of say, oh, these evil genocidaires are out to get us. In addition, I would say he sees a large part of Eastern Congo, a tiny part of Eastern Congo, but compared with the size of Rwanda, a large part of Eastern Congo, as part of Rwanda itself. He basically said that those guys sitting around the conference table in Berlin drew the borders that basically divided Rwanda. And to a certain degree, that's slightly true. There are some parts of Uganda and there are some parts not that far from the border. But the sort of official Rwandan histories that every school kid learns, and this was under in days when the kings were running the show, and the kings and the Belgians in Belgian days. It was true in the Hutu Republic days, 1960 to 1990s, and it's been true under the RPF. Every school kid learns that there's this map that shows a big chunk of what we know as North Kivu in the Congo as part of Rwanda. This is natural Rwanda territory. It's not, but every Rwandan genuinely believes that it is because that's what they've been taught in school. So there is a little bit of this, hey, these are us, these are our people. To the degree that the Rwandans there, the vast majority, Rwandan-speaking people, Rwandan ethnic people, Hutus, Tutsis, to the degree that they're there, the vast majority of them came in colonial days and then in the subsequent migrations forced by political upheaval in Rwanda. So, number one, security. Number two, this notion of like, hey, this part of Congo really is ours. Number three, I think, would be Lebensraum, meaning living space for Rwanda. There's like 13 million people that live there, and it is the most densely populated mainland African country. And the Kivus are much less populated. They've got a lot more space out there, and I think it just makes it easier to sort of put your difficult people, close by so that you can keep an eye on them. You solidify control of your borders. You just make things a little bit easier, a little more stable when each person in Rwanda has a little bit more land for themselves.
That's an unfortunate term. Oh, not well. It is an unfortunate term, but it's also a bit ironic given that Kagame fancies the Tutsis, the Jews of Africa. So,
yeah, no,
well,
exactly.
There's no better way to inherit the mantle of German imperialism than to do it in the name of an oppressed Jewish community, right?
No, that's
and
true.
they're big buddies with Israel because they bond over the genocides. They're genocide buddies.
Right.
No, that's
No,
true.
it's,
That's true. The mutual respect.
and there's a similar, I mean, the Israelis don't have the same domestic authoritarian
Well,
instinct.
these days.
Well, they're working on it, but it still isn't a one party state, let alone a one man state. But they do have the same, you know, settler imperialism with respect to, land that is beyond their recognized territory in the name of some combination of security, and it's very offensive to use the word Lebensraum with reference to the Israeli government, so let's use something else. Um, uh, uh, a claim that is, it's really very similar. It has some genuine security element, some quasi mythological but partly real sense that this is part of the historic territory, and some sense that, hey, we're really densely populated, we need some space.
Yeah.
And it's not like it's obviously there's a completely different history, but there's not it doesn't not sound in, Israeli policy.
No, exactly. It is similar in that sense. One of
So
the things
yeah,
that people
go ahead.
say a lot, and I have to acknowledge that I am one of the few people that does not emphasize this, but I have to say it because everybody else does, is the economic side of things. And the most people say that Rwanda is in Congo mainly because of the minerals. And there are a lot of minerals in eastern Congo, a lot of minerals in many parts of the Congo. But I would say is that the minerals in that part of the Congo are basically mined artisanally. It's basically ordinary people digging dirt and selling it to a trader. And that is, they're not big industrial mines. And, since before colonialism, if you were going to be trading, you would always trade to the east. So if you were in that part of the Congo, you would sell it to Rwanda, or you would sell it to somebody in Uganda, or you'd sell it to somebody who would sell it to the east. And that just has persisted before colonialism, during colonialism, after colonialism. And they have all these. One of the things that's been interesting is the increase in Rwandan gold sales since 2014 or so. They've just gone up astronomically. And but one of the things is that Rwanda has never really had very much gold, and minuscule amounts of gold. And but it's all coming from Congo, or the vast majority is coming from Congo, and the Rwandans are selling it onto international markets. And
So you discount the theory because one of the theories in terms of because I wanted to ask you about Rwanda's economy and it's seen as a real economic miracle, which of course it came from very a low state after the genocide. But one of the narratives is that so a lot of it's a mirage, and there's a lot of sort of illicit mineral trading that's undergirding the economy, the Rwandan economy. So maybe you can address like how much of the and the other thing I've heard, I've not been to Rwanda myself, but I've heard like you go to the capital and everything looks impeccable, like
absolutely,
incredibly clean, safe, developed. But that is you go outside the capital and then there's just abject poverty and it kind of crumbles. So how much of their sort of economic success is real and how much of it's a bit of a mirage?
I'd say a lot of it is real. A lot of it is real. And part of it is, I sometimes make the comment that Kigali is like is what most people see of Rwanda. They fly into Kigali. And so this is a city it's like Rwanda's putting on its new suit and going to the job interview. Because they're charming, a big part of their politics is charming foreigners, charming Westerners. And so you go
But
fly
hang
into
on a
Kigali.
second. Wait a minute. I got to stop you there. So,
Yeah.
like, that's true of North Korea too, and
Yeah.
Pyongyang, and you can, go around Pyongyang. And not that I've been there, and but and everything is pristine,
Yeah.
and you would get the impression that this is a, you know, model totalitarian society. But then, there is the that is a complete myth. And you wouldn't say that the North Korean economy is strong, or that their progress is real because they've built this fake shell city. So why should we take Kagame's, to mix a metaphor, Potemkin villages any more seriously than we take, you know, uh,
Yeah,
Kim
well, I think
Jong Il's?
I think it's more than just the Potemkin the Potemkin capital. But it is impressive in the sense that they have like grass in the center strips. It's really clean, and it's and I'm saying it's not clean by African standards. I'm saying it's clean by world standards. It gives Switzerland a run for its money. Certainly the capital, and so I think. Uh, I would say the real part of it is that there has been real economic progress. A lot of it's based on foreign assistance, and I think that Rwanda has always been a donor darling. And part of it is that they're a very organized society, and this was true of the Hutu republics that preceded the current RPF regime, the Kagame government. And we talk about how the current government built it up from nothing. Well, it was a lot better than nothing. They were a real donor darling. We loved them. They were one of these places. If you wanted to do an aid project, the local official could have 300 people out there to build the road, and they'd all work on it, and the road would be done in a few days, and all is well. And aid people are really impressed by that sort of thing. And a similar thing happens with the current regime. Um, the there is real progress. The you can sort of like look under the hood and say it's not as good as they crack it up to be, and that's true. But it doesn't mean it's not very good. And I would say Rwanda is like an A- student as far as development is concerned, but basically portrays itself as A plus 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 plus. I mean, just like beyond the pale, the best of all time. Actually, it's kind of funny. There was a guy, Stephen Kinzer, former New York Times journalist, wrote a good book on Rwanda. And it's a weird book, though. Basically, has a lot of in-depth interviews with Kagame. And because you had these long passages where Kagame is basically explaining the world as he understands it, explaining Rwanda, just in page-long dialogue or monologue, it's extremely useful. You get a sense of how the guy's thinking. The downside of it is it's almost comical because Stephen Kinzer in the introduction sort of says, Kagame is this fascinating character, and he goes, is he the greatest leader of our time, or is he the greatest leader of all time? And the thing is that when Kagame saw the book, he didn't like it at all. It was like, it's like, is there a doubt? So, and Kinzer was like really kind of surprised, like, hey, I wrote this really laudatory piece, and it wasn't 100%. It was only 98.3%. So
So
it's the mentality of these guys.
So let's debate that though, because this is actually what one of the things I wanted to talk about was just, is it, the political repression is extreme. We haven't gone into it much, but they literally have death squads that have gone to other countries to murder their dissidents. Um, and the political repression is extreme. And of course, Kagame, when Ray justifies it as like basically this is needed for Rwanda would just like go back into genocide if I wasn't ruling with an iron fist, and look at the economy and look at everything that we've been able to do. So from a Western lens, and I've heard this from, by the way, he's really charmed American evangelicals big time. And I was actually at a event recently with someone who is and talking to a woman who's big, and she's not a stupid person, uninformed, like very well informed person. She had read Michaela Wrong's book, which eviscerates the regime, but she got very defensive of Kagame, and basically her argument was basically like, well, you have to, if you're going to rebuild a country, you have to tolerate some of this. And we've seen this in US policy. Rick and I know very well. We've seen a series of ambassadors go over there and be charmed by Kagame. So I have kind of a philosophical question of like, is it how much do you sort of turn the blind eye to political repression if the results are positive economically or development wise?
I think what you do is you deny that there's political repression. And that's what a lot of people have done over the years. And, uh, you know, a lot of people say flat out that these are, and the Rwandans start off, the Rwandans deny all these things. The Rwandans to this day deny that they're in the Congo. And the sort of, comfort with flat out lying sometimes works with people who, like us, are less used to seeing people who will tell such bald-faced lies.
Oh, now we have lots of experience.
Yeah, now we're getting used to it. We're getting used to it.
I mean, it sounds like what you're describing, honestly, with the exception of the transborder adventurism, you're describing Singapore.
Oh, that's one of their models. That's a big model. Yes, since about 2003-ish or so, certainly in the, say, 2003, 2000, for about a decade after that, they were all about Singapore. And they wanted to sort of become a tech hub. They use Singapore as an explicit model. And
right, it's a non-monarchical small republic that kind of imagines itself sort of Sparta-like, that has wildly outperformed its neighbors in economic development. It is a high functioning state, and you just have to look past the authoritarianism in order to be really, really impressed with it.
Yeah, but Singapore doesn't invade anybody. And
it's true, although tell Malaysians that it's not,
true.
not to.
That's true. Yeah, yeah. There might be something to that. There might be something to that. But no, Rwanda in a lot of ways is sort of like the Germans versus the Russians in World War II, meaning that they can win all the battles or a lot of the big battles, but Congo is so vast that the Rwandans, in a sense, lost the Second Congo War, the 98 to 2003 war, because they just they overreached.
All right, so talk about that. Like what's the downside to this policy? You absorb what you can. The West doesn't seem to care very much. It's just a few people complaining about conflict diamonds and gems and stuff. And yeah, you create some of the world's biggest humanitarian disasters. But your capital is looking pretty good. So what's the downside to this sort of Lebensraum-based policy?
Well, the thing is if they basically go to Lebensraum to the degree that they've gone so far, they can probably hang on to that for a very, very long time. I think the thing is that if they get sucked deeper and deeper into the Congo, they will have a very difficult time holding all of that. And I think they learned that lesson. But one of the things is they would like to have a situation where at some point the occupied parts of Congo are recognized as being somehow different, somehow federal, somehow distinct from the rest of Congo. So the autonomous governance to one degree or another, that would give the Rwandans a real say there, legitimate say. The thing is the people in Kinshasa, and the capital of the Congo, on the other side of the country, are 1,000 miles away from Rwanda, and they want no part of what's going on right now, and they reject it. All of them do.
So this sounds a lot like Russia and Ukraine.
No,
right? The Ukrainians naively insist that I'm using naively sarcastically that they're a unitary country and that Donetsk and Luhansk and Crimea are actually an integral part of Ukraine. And Russia wants a ceasefire on the basis of, hey, we took this fair and square, right?
Yeah.
Like, how different is this from that?
Well, I think one of the differences is that the people in Kinshasa are basically not being hurt directly by the Rwandans. The people who are being hurt by the Rwandans are the people living in the east. And the people in Kinshasa are just more and more angry about what the Rwandans are up to, and therefore are really digging in their heels and not going to make any political compromises. So Rwanda is kind of in a bind. They have to decide of like, how do we get these guys to say uncle? And I think they've been sort of making hints about trying to sort of have a national uprising or rebellion against the Tshisekedi government, or I don't rule out an assassination attempt or something like that. But at the end of the day, most Congolese will not settle for that. And then this is sort of the Rwandans' dilemma. They can control this stuff, but nobody recognizes it. And this is particularly the case, over the last few weeks when they've taken Goma and Bukavu, and suddenly we're seeing this response, including by the Americans. And I have to give the Trump administration its due here. They sanctioned a very senior Rwandan general who was largely responsible for many of the wars in the Congo, much of the fighting in the Congo, and the guy's a serious sanctions target, and we finally did it, and I take my hat off to.
I'm sure those were career professionals that Doge has yet to locate who
Yeah,
were mainly responsible for that.
let's
Well,
not
it
draw
was
too
all
much
teed up.
attention
It's been
to
all
it,
teed up for
Rick,
months
because
and
you
years.
may end up encouraging the administration to
Sanction
invite
everybody.
him to Camp David, and so yeah, okay, we made note of it. Credit to the Trump administration. Now let's move on so that we don't draw their attention to their good deeds.
But the Trump was followed by the Belgians cutting off the Rwandans, and just 2 days ago by the Brits doing the same thing. And the Brits were like big supporters for years of the Rwandans, and had this weird the last British government had this weird policy worked out where they would send their asylum seekers to Rwanda, and they paid Rwanda an enormous amount of money to take these guys. I think like 2 people showed up or something.
We also sent Afghans to Rwanda. You remember that?
So what we've got 2 minutes left. What do you have your eyes on with respect to this? What are the inflection points that are coming up?
I guess the thing is, before before this year, the Rwandans had sort of been playing this fairly carefully. They'd occupied a lot of territory. They were nibbling and constantly taking a little bit more. We were doing these negotiations that were with them. The negotiations, frankly, didn't do anything positive, or they did very little that was positive. The Rwandans, doubled their territory, more than doubled their territory between over the course of calendar year 2024. And then I think, but the Rwandans had been careful about not taking any big population centers, and specifically Goma, the city of Goma on the border there. And I think the confusion that sort of surrounded the advent of the Trump administration sort of they sort of figured the Americans in the West, this is my supposition, would be distracted enough so that they could make these decisive moves, and nobody would do anything. But they miscalculated. And now the UN is up in arms about it. The Americans sanctioned this guy. The Brits and Belgians have cut off assistance, and it looks like more is going to be following. But so the question is, what does Rwanda do now? And what they've done in the past is they've basically sort of pulled their horns in a little bit, and they've kind of launched the charm offensive, and they might be making cooperative moves with us and other Westerners and other Africans, and they'll do that for a certain amount of time. But that hasn't started yet, and they're still moving forward. And so there is that possibility that they'll do what they did in 1996 and get sucked deeper and deeper and deeper. And I don't think that'll end well.
I'm curious as to the Trump administration's once they discover Rwanda. One thing is, does Kagame sort of appeal to Israel to go to bat for him with the Trumpists because they love Israel so much? And then also, like, honestly, Kagame is like the kind of leader that Trump loves. I mean, Trump admires. Like, he in his dreams could he be a Kagame? Like, he's way too stupid and incompetent. But that's the kind of leader that he would probably admire. So I think Rwanda, I look to see Rwanda really strike back on the lobbying and influence front. I think this mineral concessions deal is Congo trying to get out in front of whatever Kagame's response is going to be, because he sees the danger there of Kagame wooing Trump, which is so easy to do. So I think Tshisekedi, they're trying to get out in front of that with this
Yeah, it's a good
weird
point.
mineral deals, because they know that that's what he wants. They're looking at the Ukraine situation. So I'm looking to see like who wins the influence game
Yeah,
with,
and you have both sides coming to us.
yeah.
That's
So I just have a suggestion for Paul Kagame. Um, I believe this is true. If not, these are facts too good to check. But there was back in the 80s a really cool not law firm, a lobbying firm that specialized in representing the worst dictators in the
I
world.
think they already have that, honestly. I
I,
think they already have a
well,
lot.
I
they're both Stone
believe
and Kelly.
that they were that this lobbying firm even had Mobutu as a client. It was called Manafort and Black, and it was run by Paul Manafort. And Roger Stone actually was part of it too. And so my suggestion to Paul Kagame is, bring the band back together, hire Paul Manafort to do your Washington lobbying. He's been pardoned. He's totally kosher again. And by the way, we don't do foreign malign influence investigations anymore. So you could probably do it off the books. We're going to leave it there. Rick Ehrenreich, you're a great American. It's great to meet you. And let's keep an eye on this situation and come back as it develops and keep us up to date.
I'll do my best. Thanks very much. It was fun.